The barbarians are in the gate. Now, Speaker Mike Johnson definitely didn't use that phrase lightly. In a recent incredibly energized press conference, House Republicans laid out a case that America is facing a very immediate, very internal threat. By opening with this stark quote, we instantly see the stakes they are trying to set. They aren't talking about some distant, foreign adversary halfway across the globe. No, they're arguing that the threat is already right inside the House.
Welcome to today's Explainer. Recently, House Republicans delivered this highly charged briefing, making the case that America is facing a very real domestic communist threat. Today, we're going to impartially unpack the anatomy of their argument, piece by piece, to understand exactly how this case is being presented to the public. By digging into their specific rhetoric, their historical comparisons, and the underlying philosophy, we can really get a grip on the framework of this political message.
To make sense of it all, we're going to break their argument down into four key pillars. First, a stark warning. Second, the Cuban experience. Third, targeting democratic socialists. And fourth, an existential choice.
All right, let's jump right into part one, a stark warning.
Speaker Johnson kicks things off by anchoring his argument with a massive claim. He states that self-identified communists have actively infiltrated the U.S. Congress. In fact, he specifically claimed there are currently double digits of communists serving in Congress today. According to Johnson, these aren't politicians hiding their views in the shadows. They're running openly, they're actually winning seats, and they are actively preparing to weave their ideology into United States policy. He's framing this not as some fashionable theory you debate on a college campus, but as an active movement holding real, tangible political power.
So, that leads us straight into our second pillar, the Cuban experience.
Here we hear from Representative Carlos Gimenez, who gets very personal. He points out that it has been 67 years since Fidel Castro promised free and democratic elections in Cuba. Gimenez's own family fled the country to escape what was happening, leaving with, as he notes, literally just $10 in a watch. He uses this 67-year wait as a cautionary tale of false socialist promises. The whole pitch of a better life, free healthcare, free education, he argues that it's nothing but snake oil meant to mask the true intention, which is total authoritarian control.
To really illustrate this point, Gimenez contrasts two historical vehicles, and it's a pretty fascinating visual. On one side, you have the East German Trabant, which citizens had to sit on wait lists for years to get under state-controlled production. Compare that to the West German Mercedes-Benz, built by the exact same demographic of people but readily available under a free market system. It's like night and day. He uses this to push back against modern politicians who want the government to control production, arguing that state control inevitably always leads to scarcity.
And he applies this exact same comparative logic to his own birthplace. He contrasts the absolute prosperity of Havana in 1959 with what he characterizes as complete stagnation today. He brought up photographs of famous department stores and theaters, vibrant and booming in '59, but literally crumbling today. He notes that the only cars running on the streets are 1957 models from the US, kept alive purely by the sheer ingenuity of the Cuban people. He's essentially using his birthplace as a crystal ball to warn America, arguing the state has brought nothing but decay for 6 decades.
This impassioned quote right here captures the absolute emotional core of Gimenez's testimony. He argues, people wouldn't be out there risking their lives on makeshift rafts in the Straits of Florida if communism were actually a worker's paradise. Instead, he insists the ultimate equalizer in a communist regime isn't shared prosperity at all, it's universal misery. As he emphatically states, communism robs you of your opportunity and your life, leaving everybody equally destitute.
Okay, let's pivot to part 3, targeting democratic socialists.
This is where Speaker Johnson and Representative Gimenez bring it back to domestic politics. They attribute some very specific extreme policy goals directly to the published platform of the Democratic Socialists of America. They allege that modern candidates aligned with this group want to completely radically alter the government. We're talking abolishing the Senate, packing the Supreme Court, completely dismantling the prison system by defunding the police, and enacting open borders. They're explicitly saying, look, these aren't fringe ideas, this is the actual published blueprint of their political opponents.
To anchor their critique of progressive economics in reality, Johnson cites a truly staggering figure, $5,300. That is what the median asking rent in Manhattan has hit under what he characterizes as communist leadership. Johnson argues that the reality of these policies just backfires terribly. The promise of, say, free rent or free groceries eventually slams headfirst into the reality of a $5,000 monthly rent check, and he asserts it's the working families who always end up paying the ultimate price for these ideological experiments.
On top of the economics,
Johnson alleges that progressive candidates demonstrated deep fundamental contempt for the country. During the briefing, he cited specific instances of candidates allegedly using the American flag as a napkin or turning their backs during the Pledge of Allegiance. He starkly contrasts this behavior with the profound reverence shown by grieving military families who were handed a folded flag at a loved one's funeral. His point here is clear. If a politician despises the country and its symbols, they absolutely do not deserve to lead it.
Which brings us to our fourth and final section, an existential choice. Johnson builds this final argument with a quick history lesson. He shares an anecdote about giving a VIP tour of the House floor, pointing out the phrase, "In God We Trust," inscribed in marble above the speaker's rostrum. He points out it was added in 1962, just a few years after Castro's revolution in Cuba. According to Johnson, that phrase was added by a united Congress as a direct, unified rebuke to Soviet Marxism during the Cold War. And it's a philosophy he insists must be actively rebuked all over again today.
This is absolutely crucial to their whole argument. The point Johnson is making here is deeply philosophical. He contrasts a constitutional republic, where your rights are inherent and come from a creator, against a Marxist system where the state basically acts as God. In the American system, he argues, the government can't take away your fundamental rights because it didn't give them to you in the first place. But in a communist system, because the state grants your rights, the state has the ultimate authority to just revoke them at any time.
So this is where he lays out the ultimate stakes. Johnson explicitly frames the upcoming elections not as your standard, traditional debate over marginal tax rates or the size of government. For decades, he says, Republicans and Democrats agreed on the evils of communism and just debated domestic policy. But those days, according to Johnson, they are long gone. He frames our current political landscape as a strictly binary, existential choice regarding the very survival of the American experiment.
Representative Gimenez echoes this by pushing back on that progressive promise to defund prisons we mentioned earlier. He warns that, based on his own experience and historical precedent, socialist regimes absolutely do not abolish prisons. Actually, scratch that. They expand them, specifically to silence political opposition. He points to Cuba, where people asking for simple freedoms are labeled traitors and thrown behind bars. He's directly cautioning the public, do not be fooled by the rhetoric of dismantling the carceral state, because it will only be repurposed against dissidents.
And we wrap up our explainer today with this central echoing question posed by Speaker Johnson. If not here, where? Channeling both Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan, he calls America the last best hope of man on the earth. He challenges his critics to name a better alternative, arguing that if the American experiment fails, there is literally nowhere left to run. It's a massive, sweeping framing of modern politics. So, the big question leaving this briefing is, will voters view the upcoming elections as just another standard policy dispute, or as the existential battle these lawmakers claim it to be?